everyone, thank you for coming today. Today I want to talk about misdiagnosed ADHD in men and women. I want to talk a little bit about how the mental condition ADHD is shown in men and women more specifically. Many people are unaware that diagnosing ADHD to women looks different than most known symptoms and treatments, so they can have different effects on the brain throughout life. So ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is a form of neurodivergence, which means that one's brain works different than the majority of the population's does. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but people who are diagnosed with ADHD can live normal lives and thrive doing so. Because ADHD is such a highly functional mental condition, it is often overlooked in childhood, especially in females. ADHD is widely known to have traits of restlessness, inability to focus, and troubles with self-control. While they are very common amongst people with ADHD, there are a lot more symptoms and complexes that are still being researched about today. It's a very new diagnosis in the grand scheme of things. There is much evidence that shows that ADHD in women appears different than what the population knows the disorder to be. So why is it that way, and how can we identify ADHD in women versus men? So I'll talk about what ADHD is first. ADHD is a common mental diagnosis that is usually recognized at a young age. You can be diagnosed later on in life. A lot of people aren't aware that they have ADHD, but we'll get into that a little bit more. ADHD can affect children at school, home, or in social relationships. So the most common way to detect ADHD is usually in school, when they have poor ability to keep their concentration, they have restlessness when they're sitting at the desk, or they have hyperactive speech, so maybe they'll raise their hand, call out more, talk during class when they're not supposed to. It is statistically shown that 6.1 million children are diagnosed with ADHD, making that almost 10% of the juvenile population. And that's just what we have right now. There's a lot of, overlooked cases of ADHD. The most common ages to be diagnosed are ages 12 to 7, and that's because it's more harder to distinguish ADHD in younger ages because their frontal lobe isn't really developed. So their decision making, the way that they react, is a little hard to tell when they're at a young age because their brain isn't fully developed. Just because some children may display these traits doesn't necessarily mean that they have ADHD right away. It takes a very comprehensive diagnosis by a psychiatrist in order to say that somebody has ADHD. This condition is most commonly diagnosed when these traits are inhibiting on quality of education, behavior, and social life. It's common for ADHD to coexist with other mental conditions, the most popular being depression, the other being anxiety. A lot of behavioral or conduct issues are alongside with this. About 5 in 10 children with ADHD have a behavioral or conduct issue, and about 3 in 10 children have anxiety with ADHD. So you can see that it's very prevalent. It comes along with the diagnosis. According to the CDC, boys are more than 2 times more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than girls. The reason of this is still unknown, but it's a very common diagnosis among boys, but the abundance of other symptoms that, women and men may experience are a lot different, so it's harder to detect. ADHD is a huge spectrum of different symptoms and quality. There are subcategories and subcategories within subcategories, and it's a very complex mental condition. There are 3 subtypes of ADHD. There's inattentive, which is you're easily distracted, you're unable to focus, you're hyperactive, so you're fidgety, you get bored easily, and then impulsive, which is quick to act before thinking. So those are the three. So it's inattentive, hyperactive, and impulsive. Individuals diagnosed with ADHD may feel one or all of these symptoms combined. So they all there's always a certain type of, you can either have combined or you can have one of each. It's been noted that men may manifest the symptoms externally while women manifest these traits internally. That's because, you know, boys tend to be more physically aggressive, whereas women are more emotionally aggressive. They hold their emotions in more, whereas boys are more outward about their emotions. So they like to keep their symptoms to ADHD to themselves. So fidgeting in class, they'll kind of do it under the desk, whereas boys are more out about it. So yeah, because girls are more likely to keep their emotions to themselves, this is another reason why ADHD is most commonly overlooked in women. ADHD is commonly mistaken with depression and anxiety, especially in girls. This is because hyperactivity can manifest into overstimulation or even depression. In addition to these symptoms, compared to women without ADHD, experiencing loss of self-control or low self-esteem are also common. So the impulse issues are having to do with the self-control, so biting the nails is very common, just little tics are very common, and low self-esteem is a very prominent one in ADHD. That may be because of, you know, self-reflection of behaviors, not feeling like you could fit in socially because you have that neurodivergency. But now that we have more of an understanding as to why females are less likely to be diagnosed with ADHD in early life, we can see that it has effects on emotional development later in life. Because ADHD is also often mistreated in women, this can, you know, turn into different struggles in adulthood. It's actually becoming more common for adult women to be diagnosed with ADHD during adulthood. There are many women who did not know they had this disorder, and they were actually misdiagnosed with other mental diagnoses, and they later found out that it was ADHD because it can be an array of different symptoms. It's kind of hard to pinpoint, especially in adulthood. Many adults have ADHD and are unaware of it, but these individuals can recognize that their mental processes are harder for them. ADHD symptoms in adulthood can affect time management skills, so that'll be really hard for having a job in adulthood. Impulsive decision making, such as spending. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know if I was recording. I'm gonna keep going though. Where was I? So it can affect impulsive decision making, such as spending and stuff like that. You can be disorganized in the workplace, disorganized at home, and that can lead to a lot of stress in life. And it can lead to trouble with coping with stress as well. Because ADHD has to do with behavioral disorder, it is common for teens and adults to form substance abuse issues, as well as risky behaviors that come with great consequences. This can also lead to, you know, very detrimental problems in adulthood. And if it goes, you know, mistreated and misdiagnosed, it can lead into further complications. So I hope I could show you a little bit more about how ADHD affects women more emotionally than it does with men. I hope that it can help you notice the signs of, you know, young women with ADHD. And that's, you know, having the hyperactive part of ADHD, having the having the impulsive part of ADHD, they manifest in different ways that it does with men. And like I said, it's common for people with ADHD to thrive in life, and there are medications that you can take to help deal with these type of symptoms that run into everyday type of life. So yeah, that's what I have to say about ADHD. Hopefully you're more enlightened about it. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you.